You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games,
physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube. I saw the games. I watched the
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Modes. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Weemuth, welcoming you to episode 18, Fans' Sports Biases. All our kids are above average. Recorded on the morning of Sunday, October 5th, 2024. So, Bob, raise your hand if your alma mater is now bowl eligible.
It's not even Columbus Day.
Yeah, the Halloween candy has literally just been put out, and the leaves are still green.
The leaves, yeah, exactly. And remember when bowl eligibility used to be the goal?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was like the hallmark of a truly successful season at IU was we get a invite to the Tidy Bowl in Tacoma, Washington.
Yes.
Sometime at 2:00 on December 27th, playing some other like down a program out of either the SEC or the ACC that was having a rough year.
Exactly. Yeah, we aspired to those glorious 6 and 7 seasons like that.
And now we're hearing the word playoffs, and it's not even Jim Mora.
Yeah.
Talking about the Colts going playoffs.
Yeah.
You're talking about playoffs? No, we're actually talking about playoffs. We could actually we are in the running potentially for the playoffs.
Yep. In year one of the coach's tenure. Yeah.
Year one.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. Like, we had our chip stack pod some weeks or months ago. And yeah, I was thinking about just applying to Signetti that I don't think Signetti has a chip stack. I think it's a chip mountain right now. Possibly a chip mountain range, given what's happened in the first, 6 games now.
So he walked into the casino. He put a $20 bill into the Wheel of Fortune machine. He hit the button. Max betted it. Hit the mothered low jackpot. Now he's playing with house money.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be playing with house money. I mean, now again, you shouldn't say this because I about did it. I about showed a fan bias.
Yeah.
The bias of an exhausted, bias that it can't possibly go wrong. And it is always a pop. We talk about this all the time. It's a range of probabilities, but no, at this point, he has a large reserve of house money that he's playing with, which I guess could be best said as decades of our tears and our dashed hopes and dreams that he's unlocked that just kind of poured out the slot, or that as again, as you hit the jackpot, it goes din, 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 din. It's like, it's happening. And again, even if you drop a couple here and there, it's never gonna. I don't think it's gonna feel, at least for a while, that there's an absolute collapse.
Yeah, yeah.
It took us a while, and I'll be honest, it took us a while with Allen. It took us a while with Allen to accept that it was collapsing. Yeah,
no, I think you're right. I think what we mentioned on the chip stack pod, or at least it's something that I've kind of noticed in my own research on it. It's not just when coaches win; it's oftentimes how they win.
Mm-hmm.
And what you said is, I think, what stands out most is that it's all the PTSD that's been built up over the years. Is that Signetti now is doing to other teams what other teams have done to IU and IU fans for decades.
Right.
I mean, think about third down. Third down is now an IU repository of happiness now. And remember back in the olden days, when you and I used to go to games, or what I would say, the other team would have the ball, and I would get a sack or something, or a penalty. The other team would get a penalty. It's 3rd and 20. They have the ball. And I would lean over and typically say, they have us right where they want us. There's going to be a perfect 21-yard throw that's going to get them a first down. And now IU is doing that now with like Cooper and Williams.
It's 3rd and 20, and it when you have Rourke who can deliver the ball. I mean, it just feels like there's just so much there, and there's just so many different weapons, and it's just fun to see that brand of football being played at Memorial Stadium by IU, not being, as you say, not being done to IU.
Yeah.
But so it's been a great few days. Yeah, it's been a great 24 hours, and it's like this is not the destination. It's a starting point, I guess.
Yeah.
Speaking of starting points, Trent Sisley is committed to be a Hoosier.
Yeah.
Jalen Harrelson decided not to be and decided to go to South Bend to go with Micah Shrewsbury. And we're waiting to hear back from several others. Braylon Mullins is probably the one that, that we're all kind of watching the most of. And just a real quick note on, I'm really happy with the Sisley commitment because I like the idea of some smart guy told me years ago and has kept saying it. If you get guys in the top 80, you stick around for 4 years, they become productive players in their juniors and senior seasons.
Yeah.
And we can statistically show this. And that's the sort of baseline for players that, you can go the one and done route. You can go this, you can go these types of routes, or, you can try to find the diamonds in the rough at the 300s that are 7'4" and with amazing footwork and hockey goalie skills. Yeah. But this is the sort of guy, again, that kind of, he's a foundational player. And obviously the work's not done. You got to find other things. But you can see how a Sisley, let's just assume the position that guys like Rice and Carlisle stick around for 4 years, or even Mbako sticks around for 4 years. You can see where Sisley could fit in as a sophomore with them, freshman and sophomore with in their junior year as well.
Yeah.
So that's a good sign, and we can just land again. I would love to see us land the Mullins kid out of Greenfield Central, with that as those areas that there's a lot to be. It's also just nice to win a high school recruitment.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice to win a high school like a long-term high school recruitment.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you're right. It's I always think about like diversification of the roster. Obviously, as you said, he is a sweet spot kid, so naturally that's right up my alleyway in terms of interest. It's also just the fact that he is. You think about how many times have IU got guys that are 6'7" plus and high skilled that aren't bigs, aren't like centers. Mm-hmm. I just had plenty of like Noah Vonleh, Thomas Bryant,
right?
TJD, those guys. I mean, those guys are obviously great, but I just kind of like missed that sort of like middle big sort of guy. The guy that's like a face up big 6'7" that has like diverse skill sets, can shoot, can stretch the floor and all that. That's been sort of like a missing piece at IU for a while. I mean, they get those only every once in a while, whereas like the elite teams, they have multiple guys like that on their squads at any given time.
Alex Caravan, the power kid, who was the kid that went to Miami for a while, and like he was Archie Miller's dude that we got around about. Yeah, Matt Cross was another one. I mean, I'm going back.
Yeah,
go back the last decade, and that sort of
Anunoby is like the rare exception, unfortunately.
Yeah, and even Anunoby was, you really didn't know what he was until he showed up, because he wasn't a kid. He was a kid that was kind of a diamond in the rough, if I recall correctly, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was like rated in the 200s, but he was like really high ceiling. So a lot of people like were poking the tire, like kicking the tires on him, but didn't really like go through with it. So,
but yeah, he was somebody that, that was kind of a little in that same vein, but. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that I like a little bit of variance and diversity in the roster as well. And, especially as basketball practices are starting, media days happened. It's just right around the corner. And it's always, hey, the Parkside Pirates have a full, we have our team selected, and we had our first 2 practices this week. We're going to be, getting through the preseason grind of trying to push tempo and working on some concept versus more structured offensive, pattern offensive concepts. And we're just, it's a lot of fun with that group. But I mean, we're happy, but it's like, it's like Christmas again. In fact, right over there on the table, do you know that Amazon's putting out a Christmas wish book now for kids?
Oh, really?
Hold on, for you guys watching, let me look at this thing. It's unbelievable. I'm sorry. I always joke about it's an Amazon catalog.
Oh, you know what? They're really like going for nostalgia, aren't they?
It's like we're looking at this and we're circling stuff.
People miss the old catalogs, don't they?
We do. I mean, it's like here are the game sections. It's like it's unbelievable that it's like I always joke about the Sears Wish Book. Well, Amazon's actually doing it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, good for them. No, I think that's a brilliant idea because I think there are many people are nostalgic for like tangible I don't know, books that they can like look through to actually pick out, like they remember when they were younger.
Oh, you sit there with you let the kid, you give the kid a crayon or you give the kid a marker, and he's marking on that. He's not marking on my walls.
Exactly.
So
that's
so speaking of nostalgia, boy, that was a completely unexpected turn there in my mind.
That's okay.
But we again, Christmas is coming, so's basketball. And but we also talk about with Christmas coming, with fall here. It doesn't feel like it here in Columbus right now, but home field apparel, coaches jackets.
Those things are pretty awesome, aren't they?
I mean,
where would you place the timing of those? Like when you first saw those, like what year came to mind for you?
Honestly, it felt like the 70s.
Yeah.
For me, I remember those jackets, and I remember like high schools had them. My dad had a Max L jacket like that. I used to love to wear. It was perfect little. Yeah, it was like because it's not bad enough for a winter coat.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get away with and you want to be able to layer. And so the coaches jackets, or especially if there's any sort of moisture or precipitation, like. I went to opening day in that type of jacket. My first opening day, Reds opening day in 1993, when it was.
Did you ever Chris Sabo like goggles like at that time?
No, we should have, because it was like shooting ice chunks at us. We actually got out of it was my senior in high school. We got out of high school by taking a college day at the University of Cincinnati, and it was like 38 degrees and like little ice droplets hitting us in the head. It was freezing, and I'm in a Max L because I needed to stay dry. So those coaches jackets are very similar. Max L cassette tapes, for those of you playing at home who don't remember what those were, back when you used to record your albums through cassettes, so you could play them in the car. But yeah, those jackets are lightweight. They're great with just kind of, and they're great to wear out, on weather like this where it could be 45 degrees and raining a little bit in the morning, and then 60 degrees with the sun out, and you can either take it off or you're still comfortable wearing it as you're sitting there in a stadium or even in a state park or wherever you would find yourself.
Yeah, that's a good descriptor, because like when I first saw the line hit on homefieldapparel.com, I think one of the first ones I saw was Michigan State, and I remember specifically. At a IU Michigan State game, it was those awful like not to like bring up the reference the song, but it was really bad November rain. It was cold. It was just like dingy, and it wasn't like just pouring rain. It was just kind of that light London cold sort of rain. And I remember just like looking at George Perlis. And he had that jacket.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like, huddled up like this. And so that was the first image that came to mind, is like, oh man, like I remember that day. But I mean, George Perlis is wearing that jacket, and clearly it had some utility, but yeah, no, those jackets are really comfy. And I think I'm looking to get an IU one, and I need to find like a secondary one as a gift idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, all those, like, when I look at those, I literally think of the coaches in the 80s. Like when I see the Iowa one, I think of Hayden Fry.
Okay, yeah.
The Michigan one, I think of Bo Schembechler.
Bo Schembechler.
And so
Ohio State, Earl Bruce.
yeah, exactly.
the happy times.
Yeah, exactly. Not the later times where you look a little bit more miserable and
right. Yeah.
after an IU game.
Huddled around. Yeah. Huddled around a barrel with fire in it because he's down and out.
But yeah, but you're right. I mean, the holidays are coming up, so we should definitely encourage folks to check it out. And yeah, I would say this is that it does make for a good gift. The packaging is great, and there is something special about seeing the home field emblem on the box when it comes. So so we encourage all the X's and Joe's listeners to go check out homefieldapparel.com and find some stuff for your fellow sports fans on your Christmas list. All right. And when we come back on X's and Joe's, we will finally jump in. We'll talk about fan bias. How do our biases impact what we do? How does it impact what teams do? And Bob and I will eventually get into how bias actually impacts Bob and Mike. So coming up next on X's and Joe's.
And we're back. And so, Mike, I when I did the title, I thought to myself, when we were talking about doing this show, I kind of thought this is the perfect title because I know how much of a Garrison Keeler Prairie Home Companion fan you are. I mean, I think you actually didn't you like spend an entire winter break once, or like took a semester off and you traveled around in a van selling grilled cheese sandwiches and hot cider out the back of a VW microbus, following Prairie Home Companion when it went on a road tour.
I went to Minneapolis and just followed Lord Keeler wherever he went. So, yeah.
I mean, actually, all sarcasm aside, I never minded the show too much. Like driving with my parents in the car, it was always better than some of the other crap that was on that my dad would subject me to. Well, but I do know that it's like after a while, like I know that show can be like sandpaper across the top of your head.
Yeah. See, yeah, it's interesting. Like, I always like NPR listening is just sort of different. Like it's always apt for parody, let's say, because there is just like a consistent, almost easy to mimic quality to a lot of NPR stuff. I mean, you remember I used to like joke, like I would do fake ad reads for NPR. Next on NPR, they have that person that's like the up voice.
Well, as you know, with NPR, you have to be very quiet and talk kind of into your microphone in a fairly hushed tone.
Yeah.
Right.
It definitely has that, like, that Quaaludes and coffee kind of like vibe to it.
Right.
But on Keeler, I was not nearly as into him, but I did like David Sedaris, who's like Sedaris is actually really funny. Keeler's kind of humorous without necessarily being funny, I guess. So, but people don't even. I wonder what percentage of our listeners even know what they're talking about. Just Google YouTube Garrison Keeler, and you will find. He definitely had that kind of like quality of that. No, let's talk about the women and men of Upper Minnesota.
All the men. Well, and so, but
what was the tagline? All the men are what?
So there's a segment called Lake Wobegon Days. It was like a franchise. It was his version of, I don't know, Hogwarts, where he had this fictional
it's a mythical Minnesota town,
right?
Where he tells stories about them, but they're all made up, but they're kind of loosely aligned to typical Minnesota behavior.
Yeah. So all the men are good looking, all the women are handsome, and all of our kids are above average. All of our children are above average.
Yeah. So
that was kind of how he would describe Lake Wobegon. So, which is, again, when you think about bias, the idea of the kids from my town are better than the kids from your town.
Yeah.
The kids from my school are better than the kids from your school.
Yeah.
Your school is the problem with education. We are the ones who are killing it, even though our test scores show that we're in the bottom quartile.
Yeah.
Because the test is just plain wrong. Little Timmy's special.
Yeah.
And he's probably on to something about the paste tasting good. Have you ever tried putting that on birthday cake? It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So there's the framing for bias, I think, is that we just have this belief that just because we know it, we're familiar with it. It's because you're not. I can make fun. I can go out against them, but you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
They're mine.
That's my team. Your team and my team. Yeah, it kind of gets back to our tribalism conversation we had with rivalries. It's kind of aligns to that pretty well. But yeah, bias. I mean, everyone knows what bias is. I mean, it basically just means you have a preference for something or against something. And so it just, and bias, when people hear it, they immediately assume it's bad. And that's not always the case. There are some biases, obviously, that we want. I mean, if there's a fire, we expect you would have a bias towards your own children. So imagine like the dystopian hellscape you live in, where it's like, okay, Billy, stop crying. I need to take care of all these random strangers first before I come tend to you. We don't want that kind of objectivity. Now, bias, let's say in terms of if you are a hiring manager or a juror, we don't want that kind of bias to be coming into the conversation. Because not only is that bad, it's possibly illegal. So bias is obviously very context driven. In some cases, it's a good idea. In other cases, it's not. And I think, like, it would be fair to ask, like, why would you have a show about bias? Everyone knows that as fans, we have a preference for our own team. That's not breaking news. My answer to that is that's true. But I think what we're talking about is not affirming the fact that fans are biased. We all know that. It's more about understanding how bias actually impacts what we do and how we think about the sport, especially in the ways that we may not be aware of how bias is impacting our thinking. And so that's kind of where, my idea and talking with Bob, like thinking about, okay, well, how we construct the show. And that's kind of the basis. Not that bias exists, but how does it sort of warp our perception of reality?
And I think we want to see, you see a field of plow horses and you look at this horse that's yours and you say, you're the unicorn. There's nothing wrong with that. Honestly, it's actually what fandom really is. Fandom is faith. Fandom is belief. It's a belief in the unseen. You know it to be true because you want it, because basically you believe it to be true.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing as analysis. It's not the same thing as looking at this from an objective lens. In fact, I think a fan should never really look at it from an objective lens in the throes of battle. Yeah. Like when your team makes a shot, you should be like, "Yay, we hit it." Yeah. We knew you could do it all along. Because at that point, that's where your body's saying it. Yeah. But if you're on FanDuel and you're basically betting on the 12% for 3-point shooter to go 6 for 8 from beyond the arc.
Yeah.
If you're picking, straight up your team to win and you're putting the equity of your house in it when you're a 25-point underdog, that's and whether you're doing that in the literal sense or the figurative sense.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're talking about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's time and place. It's like the idea, and we'll get into kind of the idea that, as fans, we have different sort of like roles, I guess. We have different parts of our brain that are operating. And sometimes the problem is just that one part of our brain is operating when the other part should be kicking in. And that's where it comes in. But you're right. I mean, you wouldn't want a totally unbiased fan base. Like imagine going to Assembly Hall and you had 17,000 plus fans that were utterly unbiased about the outcome. Everyone just sitting on their hands, like maybe they take out their iPads and are just recording, okay, this is what happened. Yes, he shot that percentage. That is right on line with, what he should be doing. Big golf clap, at best. Yeah, you would not want that. I mean, and again, that's your point, Bob, that it's when you're in the moment that you should be a fan. It's just that obviously when the game is over, then obviously like there are other sort of demands that kick in. Maybe the analytical demand kicks in. Maybe you're having a conversation where maybe being 100% a fan is not exactly what you should be doing in that moment. In the same way that when you're at the game, maybe being 100% analytical is not the best thing to be doing.
Which again, sometimes if I'm sitting next to you, it works out really well. But
yeah, exactly. Between you, when you and I go to a game and we're together, we have our own sort of rapport. When I'm with others that are not Bob Mose, I kind of go a completely different direction.
Same thing. I'm just like, and again, you and I do get more spirited, even when we're on the pod when we're like watching how you get the crap knocked out of them in certain situations. But that being said, I think you kind of hit that. I think the other thing when you were saying about how you should be projecting, if you're with the bias afterwards, if things don't go well, this is where you start seeing people emotionally tweeting at recruits of "Don't come here. This place is a dumpster fire."
Exactly. Yes. That is definitely the admonition for.
Don't do it. Exactly. It's not a smart idea. It's like
if you really want to help Kentucky get our recruits, that's exactly what you should be doing, is tweeting at recruits.
Like that. And just, basically, it's garbage. We're trash.
So, I mean, before I jump in, like I try to give, trigger warnings. So there will be some academic material presented from the field of psychology. So if you want to avoid rehashing the nightmares of your Psych 101 class from freshman year, maybe fast forward the next 5 minutes or so, because we'll actually be touching on some things that maybe seem academic, but I think are good foundational things to kind of talk about. Now, the good news is I have about 2 hours of material I could have presented, but I boiled it down to just about 5 minutes. So I'm not going to waterboard everyone through the full 2-hour presentation. We're just going to give you the basics of what you need to know to have, move this conversation along. All right, so when we talk about bias, so knowing bias exists and all fans have it, what's the point? Like, how does it impact us? Well, one thing that it does is that it creates a distortion in terms of our ability to project future events. I call it a fan forecast bias. And what it is, it's the tendency for sports fans to miscalculate the probability of positive or negative outcomes for their preferred teams. And so the way that plays out typically is that as a fan, you are looking through the lens of your team as a fan. You want an outcome to happen. Whereas, let's say if you're a gambler, and Bob, I think, put the right framework around that. Gamblers don't care who wins. Gamblers just want to know, okay, who is going to win? That is the question that they ask. As a fan, you're not thinking of that same question the way a gambler is. You're wanting your team to win. And so anytime you want to have an outcome take place, we know, and this is not just sports related, it happens in all sorts of fields. It happens in like the stock market, in the crypto market, when you're buying a car, almost any sort of transaction where the outcome is not certain, bias will oftentimes come in. And it typically comes in, and this is sort of like the equation. The more emotionally invested you are in a particular outcome, the more likely you are to basically get things wrong. It could happen on the positive side or negative side, but anytime your emotions get pulled into a scenario.
Mike, think about being in Iowa or New Hampshire 2 years before a presidential race, and you're watching the campaigns coalesce. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about here, where everybody feels like you have an equal shot. Like we have a chance to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like a multi-horse race, primary race.
Especially if you've been involved in those campaigns, especially if you're like in the 8th place campaign, you think, well, I mean, it's possible. Anything could happen.
If we just keep knocking on doors, and if this happens, and at this point you got like a crime wall of all these things have to happen. And and Venus and Mars are in alignment, so we got a shot at it.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about like IU's recruiting over the summer. I think we were on the one pod, and I said, what they need to do, they had basically to hit like a 6-leg parlay,
right?
And like in a lot of campaigns, it's like that too. It's like,
Yeah,
these 8 things all happen perfectly in alignment. They only have 1 in 200 chance of happening. But if they did happen, we would have the outcome we're looking for.
Or a shot at it. That's the other thing, or a chance.
Or at least a chance.
Or
maybe the last 2 legs don't quite work out, but we get close enough.
We're in there. We can survive to the next one.
Yes, exactly. We'll make it to the next day. We'll make it to Super Tuesday. Yeah. So in terms of like the bias and how it creates this distortion, like, what is sort of driving it? And there's a term in psychology called motivated reasoning, and I'm sure people may have at least heard of this. So I'll give you sort of the generic definition of it. It's a cognitive response in which fans allow emotion-loaded biases to affect how information is perceived. Now, that's sort of like the focus. It's the perception, like the information you're taking in, the things you are literally seeing is being influenced by what you want to have happen. You want your team to win. So you're going to be more likely to focus on information that will give you a sense that, yeah, actually my team is going to win. And you'll be more likely to ignore information that might suggest that the other team is going to win. And so that's what, sort of like the subscript here of this is that, fans tend to favor evidence that aligns with their preferred beliefs and reject information that contradicts those beliefs, despite the volume and quality of the evidence. So this is the one like psychology person I will reference. His name is Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. I would highly recommend people Googling him. He's a great writer. He writes on all sorts of things, philosophy, politics, psych. I think he just had a book out now about social media. So he talks about, sort of that David Hume concept of the passions sort of driving the intellect or the logic. That's, we like to think of ourselves as being like completely objective. We like to think of ourselves as being almost like scientists. We take in information, we apply the scientific method, and we come out to some kind of like logical conclusion based upon the evidence. What we find oftentimes, especially when it comes to issues where we do have a bias, is that we are less like a scientist, but we're more like a defense attorney. We arrive at the end destination we want to come to. We basically come to the conclusion first. Then we cherry pick the information, the evidence that allows us to come to that conclusion in the first place. So instead of starting at the beginning and moving to the end, we start at the end and we like turn back and try to find the route that allows us to believe what we believe.
And the evidence doesn't have to necessarily be true, valid, or even plausible. And I was just, as you're talking about this, I was thinking about the streets of Berlin, Paris, London, Moscow, St. Petersburg in 1914 in August.
Yeah.
We'll be home by Christmas. Or I think you and I talked about this briefly before, which was, you want to see this in a 4-minute movie scene, Gone with the Wind, when they're doing the brandy and cigars at the Wilkes home before the war. And they're having the conversation, and the conversation of, the war one gentleman's worth 20 Yankees, and so all the young men of the South are talking to each other, and then oh gosh, who was the famous character actor who plays Scarlett O'Hara's dad? Looks at Leslie Howard.
O'Brien?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You can Google it. Anyway, he looks up and says, and what says the captain of our guard? Well, if Georgia fights, I'll be there, but I just hope the North will let us out. They're all living in this delusional world that somehow it's going to be okay. And, that because we're all above average, we're just going to show up and the Yankees are going to, leave a yellow trail behind them as they run back to their cities. And then Rep Butler steps up and goes, you don't have a single factory that makes a cannon.
Yeah.
They have the Navy. They're going to strangle you to death, and all you got are cotton and slaves. And at the end of the day, a bunch of you are just going to you're not going to come back in one piece. You're going to come back in a casket or hobbling around.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, then the one,
the twins.
No, it was one of whom was Superman, George Reeves.
Yeah.
No, the one who played Ashley Wilkes, Leslie Howard's cousin, says, just starts trying to, basically tries to get into a duel, and then it's like, no, Leslie Howard's Ashley Wilkes goes, he's the best shot in the country and has dealt with much better shots than you.
Yeah.
He's doing you a favor, not taking your head off with a pistol.
Yeah.
So it's like that to me is the motivated reasoning what we're talking about, where it's, or that sort of evidence, aligned evidence, where you believe it to be true.
Yeah.
But it may, in a situation, like if we're talking about war, it's actually like why countries make mistakes going into combat.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need it for recruitment. You need it for people to buy in, because you need an army to do this. But
it's always like the sort of like emotional and functional parts of our brain are always at war with each other, and one sometimes always outwits the other. But the evidence isn't true. The evidence isn't factual. It's perceived. It's a perceived truth. Yeah, it does that. Just like on a sidebar, that Red Butler scene, which was great, and I think we'll probably put that in the show notes.
We'll put that in the show notes.
It reminds me of that letter that General Sherman wrote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, same time frame.
So like people may not remember, General Sherman, he was actually president of what would later become Louisiana State University. He was a university president in Baton Rouge. And as the South was going to secede, he literally wrote this letter. I think it was to a friend, but I think it was implied that it was supposed to be an open letter. And he basically does. What's that?
Was it his brother-in-law who was a U.S. senator?
It was to a person, but it was kind of implied, I think, that because it was almost like an audience letter.
Right.
And I think he actually, so it's funny. It was basically, he goes through the Rhett Butler narrative. Yeah, you don't have the weapons and all that. But it was funny. It was written almost the way you would expect a Midwesterner to disappoint or depress a Southerner. I think I think the second sentence in that letter, he literally wrote, "You people don't know what you're doing."
Sam Houston said the exact same thing to the Texas legislature on secession, which is, it's colder up there, so they don't get fired up as fast, but they will come at you with incredible force to the point where, and it's just failure to recognize the other side.
Yeah.
The failure to recognize there's an opposing force.
Yeah.
Like, our players are going to improve on the off season. Do you think the other ones are sitting there just, I don't know, eating pizza and playing Pac-Man?
that is one of my favorite. Yeah, it's one of my favorite sort of a fan bias nodes is you just don't look at all those videos I've seen of the guys working out off season. You think they don't have workout machines in East Lansing?
No.
Looking around, it's like, my God, we don't have any equipment. What do we do here?
How'd you guys sell your salt? We were selling saltwater taffy in the Wisconsin Dells this summer instead of actually working on basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
We need a fundraiser for NIL.
So that's kind of, the motivated reasoning is sort of the driver, let's say, is what sort of pushes us to make these, let's say, miscalculations when it comes to our sports teams. Now, the next question is, well, can you prove that? Do we have something measurable around that? And the good news is there have been studies that have taken place. And there's one I like. It was from 2015. It was a professor in London. His name is Love, actually. And he and his team asked several thousand American NFL fans to, on a 16-game season, project the estimated number of wins that their team will have, and also to project the number of wins that their rivals will have. And so he did this there were all 30 whatever teams were represented. And what he found is that you would expect, if fans were completely unbiased in a 16 game season, that the estimates would be somewhere around 8. Because again, for every winner of a game, there's a loser game. The collective winning percentage of all NFL teams is 50%.
Right.
There has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. If it's anything other than 50%, then something's gone very wrong because you can't have 2 winners or 2 losers in a game.
Well, actually you do have the tie.
You have ties,
the pro football still is like the last place like in American sports that has a tie.
Yeah, exactly. So, but those obviously are reasonably rare. But generally, yeah. I mean, so the idea is that okay, if fans are reasonably unbiased, their projections should be around 8 collectively. Like, if you're a good team, okay, I think my team's going to win 12 games. If you're a bad team, okay, yeah, I think they're probably going to win 4 games. They'll average out to 8. What they found when they did the studies is that fans projected their teams well above an average of 8. They put actually like around 9.6. They also asked them to give projections of the win rate for their rival teams. And they lowered, and that projection came in at like 6.2. So you think about it, as fans, not only are we inaccurate, but we're inaccurate in very specific ways. We elevate our team's win percentage, and we lower our rival team's win percentage. Now, obviously, when the games are actually played, that's not actually going to be what takes place. There's just no way that every fan's team is going to win 9.5 game average. Someone has to win less than 8 games in the year. And so if you think about that, like in terms of like the actual measurement, that's where the fan bias actually exists, is that anything above 8 or below 8, let's put it this way, anything above 8 for your own team, anything below 8 for the other team is where you could say is the measurable bias. And so when you're asking like, okay, like where does this actually like come to a place where we can measure it? This is where you see it, is that there have been many studies that have taken place when it comes to this sort of scenario where people get the chance to like make a prediction on the future outcome based upon something that they want to see happen. And they typically will overestimate the happy outcome for whatever team or group that they have, and they lower or underestimate the outcome for the rival team.
Mike, it's interesting you use gold on your, as I'm looking at this, and if you're listening, he's got gold on the rival team and red on the favorite team. But I actually saw that because it's Sunday morning as we're doing this. I see Packers gold and Bears orange, as well as IU crimson and Purdue.
Yeah, that's like that looks like an off goldish green. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was actually thinking of Purdue. Now remember, bias is oftentimes unseen and it has undue influence on us.
Implicit bias.
It's very possible that I was thinking that. So that's a very good observation, Bob.
Hey, I was just thinking, as I'm looking at rival team, I kept thinking, and right now, again, Sunday morning, Packers, they suck. Packers, they suck. Doesn't matter that all evidence points to the contrary since the year 1965.
Yeah.
Yes, I still have those years in the 80s.
Exactly. And so, like, and sort of like, you think about like the dynamics of fandom. It's like, okay, well, how will this play out if I'm thinking about this? And what sort of describes, I guess, sort of like this idea that, okay, well, I've got this part of me that wants to analyze the outcome, but there's also this part of me that wants to just cheer for the team. And this is sort of like I guess it's like I've compared this model that I've come up with to be similar to what you remember from basic psychology when we talked about id, ego, and superego of the brain. Basically, your brain has like these different components. And I've always said that fans have like these two sort of the components or instincts that are sort of operating at the same time. One is called the cheerleader and the other is the stockholder. And the cheerleader the cheerleader part of your brain is that they're focused on basically support. They're cheering for the players, the coaches. They kind of see their role as basically being like the people maintaining the spirit of the team. And they tend to lean towards optimism. And again, when we talk about that last set of slides, we see that play out is like when you're actually like asked to estimate what your team is going to do, you're typically going to like overshoot. The flip side of the other side of your brain is what I call the stockholder. And the stockholder very much acts like a person who like buys stocks, is that you are looking at the team almost like it's a corporation and that it has a performance function. And so that is looking at teams in terms of like critical analysis. You're looking at the players and the coaches. How are they doing? Are their 3-point percentage improving? Is the coach recruiting the right players? So in that sense, the sort of stockholder part of you is focused on team performance and expectations. And that part of your brain is leaning towards skepticism. Is that it's like looking at what's happening and critically analyzing, okay, well, why are we not where we're supposed to be? Whereas again, the cheerleader is just focused on, hey, we're cheering for the team. We're here to support them. And my thesis has long been that when you see a lot of the conversations around sports, but especially around some of the bias that takes place in terms of like things like the misprojection of a team's capability, I think a lot of it comes down to the cheerleader and stockholder part of your brains are just operating at different times and are almost like having a fight with each other. And so, and what Bob was saying earlier is that, yeah, if you're at the game, yeah, like that's where that's kind of the cheerleader part of you is supposed to be kicking in. When the game's over and you can like take a look and say, okay, jump on a podcast or like listen to one or like, jump on 24/7. You get into like a debate on pigs about what's going on. That's kind of a stockholder part of your brain that is operating and should be operating. What happens sometimes, I believe, with some of these misprojections is that the cheerleader part can sometimes bleed into the stockholder part. Is that the cheerleader in you will be thinking, I want this team to win X number of games. So I'm going to like believe that they're going to win X number of games, even if a lot of the stockholder part of you says, wait a minute, yeah, they're not going to hit that mark. And so that's where I think a lot of this like comes down to is just that your brain is diverse. It has these different influences taking place. And sometimes there's just a conflict.
But you know Mike better than just about anybody. We all know this to be true, that when you're in that room at the Ramada Inn and you get that timeshare on that lake up in Wisconsin or Minnesota,
yeah, when you're chasing around Garrison Keeler in a van.
Right. We both know that we're gonna get our fishing boat and go up there 2 weekends a month, even in December, because we've been talked into doing it, and we've talked ourselves into doing it. That any investment seems like a good idea if it's framed a certain way,
right?
And if you believe that all of our kids are above average, that we do it, we're the best kept secret in the world. We're the best kept secret in the state.
Yeah,
they don't know how special we are.
Yeah,
our coach is the better talent evaluator than anybody else on the planet, even though they've been sub 500 the last 4 seasons.
Yeah.
All of those things, we do things the right way. All these are biases that we hear. Like these are projections of a bias towards that efficacy that we're talking about. That because, and all does it, Mike? Do you think it only comes down to this place is special to me, therefore it's special, and therefore if it's special, it can't be wrong?
Yeah. Well, also if you think about like in sports is very much a zero-sum game.
It is
that, like in our rivalry pod, we're talking about like when you lose to your rival, or let's say even just forget a rival, just you lose to another team, it feels like a loss is like a loss of personal prestige because you're so associated with the team. And also like, studies show the more you spend time talking about your team, the more you post about it, the more stuff you buy, it just raises the emotional investment that you have in the team. And so when a loss happens, it's much more difficult to just like brush it off and like, move on. It's like, no, I've lost. That's why you see like fans oftentimes when they talk about a team online, they won't say IU lost. They'll say we lost.
We lost.
So that like, it's that fusing of your your sort of like personal identity with the team it's very consistent. You see across all teams
how these play out over the years. And I want to kind of just look at this because I think as we're kind of going through this, and I think you and I, especially, we tend to look at, okay, what about those people that are out there in fandom that are just always there? And I guess we're kind of in the same boat. No, I guess we are.
Yeah.
First step in the program is to admit.
Exactly.
I'm an addict. But I think the big thing is that the casual fan too. And so understanding that when like, I think you and I, when we have conversations with people who are the vast preponderance of the world, even in IU fandom, who don't go to extraordinary lengths to watch, to involve themselves, that cheerleader thing is, it's okay. You have to kind of just temper yourself a little bit to be like, okay, they don't want to go deep into a Ken Pom conversation.
Yeah. Or like an SDQL, database of like, here's every game that we've played after a loss on the road in February. This is what the record is. Yeah.
Right. We're not going in, or they don't want to go through an exhaustive conversation about how the defensive scheme works or doesn't work, or how it's supposed to work versus how they're executing it. Nobody wants that. They want to go into because at the end of the day, they're like, I love IU, and I think they're going to, I want to see them win.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the vast majority of a fan base. And that's where I think sometimes the disconnect on this really goes, where the bias is, where I think fan bases are biased towards fan bases going, well, why aren't they supporting their team like I am? Why aren't they here fervently? Why aren't they down here with me in the bunker?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they found something else to do.
Yeah.
They're watching Real Housewives. Who gives a damn what? All you should know now is they're not here. They're not engaged. They're not watching. So maybe there's an issue.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, you and I know that in our backgrounds in like politics is that, that there's that divide between highly engaged voters, we might call activists, and just like everyone else. And that's like, whenever you talk like an activist, like, I don't understand why people are not outraged by this. You say, well,
because they're not.
Or they don't like it. They agree with you directionally. It's just that they're not building their lives around it. Right. It's kind of like the whole middle voter kind of thing. And sports is the same way. It's that fans, there's going to be a variety of fans. So like you and I have talked about, we may do like a pod way somewhere down the road. We're going to talk about like internal dynamics of like a fan base, how there's just different factions and different like teams and groups, and understanding like, okay, well, what does the actual breakdown look like? Like the overwhelming majority of fans are not spending a ton of money on like the kind of stuff maybe that we do. They don't have like, a subscription to Pigs, a subscription to Inside the Hall or a Sunday Call. They're not, they don't spend about a fourth of their, disposable income on home field apparel.
Right.
We don't mind that. We will.
We're all for it. Yeah.
But you're right. It's getting that idea that, the what I see as a fan is not what the next fan sees. And everyone's going to have like different like emotional commitments. And it's funny. Like, and I always say that as fans, like sometimes our projections I will provide, being a person that believes in science, I will provide, let's say, a critique of what we saw before in terms of those slides. I think it is absolutely true during the off season that fans are way over biased towards optimism, because it makes no sense to do the other way. Think about like emotionally, would you like if your team, let's say you have two people, one fan predicts like 28 wins in an Elite Eight visit, and the next fan predicts, let's say, 20 wins and maybe bounced out of the round of 32. Which one of those fans are going to be happy in the 8 months prior to the season starting?
Right.
Is going to get more out of it. Going to be happier. So as fans, we're sort of like emotionally incentivized to actually like try to go up the win total as much as possible to like overestimate it. Now, I always say the problem comes in is where the reality comes crashing in, typically after the first loss.
Right.
Like, what do we always see? Like, after like a team gets hyped up, who are the people that are most angry oftentimes after the first loss? It's the people that have been projecting, we're going all the way.
It's the basis of the show, Mike. The Kentucky game.
Yeah.
In 97. It's 96. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's you and me talking about it afterwards at starting this thing.
Yeah.
But damn it, and really what it came down to, I want my Final Four tickets. I'm on athletics committee. I want to go to the party, Mike. You're telling me no.
I want to jump into Showalter Fountain and start, ripping the fish.
No, Mike, you have to understand. I would have had prime Final Four seats that year.
Yes, exactly. You, as the student body president, would have had very good seats.
I mean, I would have been, had it been not in Indianapolis, I would have flown to the university plane. So my bias is going to be these bastards are going to win. Exactly. They're going to win a lot. They're going to be a 1 seed. They have to be because God loves me.
Exactly.
And that, because again, it's that personal investment for me.
Yeah.
At that moment going, crap, I may have to drive to Winston-Salem, and I'm going to do it.
But
even though someone tells me not to, because he's right.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that. So in that context of that question, what do you think the results would be if you did that study about like the NFL fans? What if you had done that study instead of the preseason? What if you did it 15 minutes after the first loss?
Oh, I mean it. So
do you think it'd be the same?
Not knowing, no, because not knowing the sample size. Because I mean, and not knowing and getting older, you and also even in coaching, when you're coaching, you're always optimistic, but you also have a sense of measured reality. You're wired differently because you're trying to find a way to put yourself in position to win the game.
Sure.
What's it going to take for us to win?
Yeah.
You know if you're 20 points better or 20 points worse.
Yeah.
But then your job is to prepare your team to get the best possible result from the actual game.
Yeah. And
you can walk into a locker room or even a room afterwards and say, we made progress tonight because we were, this is what should have happened. We were able to do, even if the end result wasn't win or loss. And you can hear that sort of bias in fan bases as well, where the bias of, well, just win, baby.
Yeah.
Like early in the process, it makes sense why you would have, quote, moral victories. Right. But there's also the bias for or against moral victories and the cheerleader versus stockholder mindset towards those. It's when we start talking about evolution of bias, which is, well, they did their best.
Yeah.
Well, that just isn't good enough.
Yeah.
So you talk about after the game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why, again, if you feel like if your rage is to a point where you don't think you can control it, don't go on Facebook.
Yeah, definitely don't go
on Twitter.
Yeah.
But even Facebook, like Facebook to me can be like the dumping ground of this. This is where the evolution of fan bases are, because sometimes I just like to start kind of laughing. And not even fan groups. Like sometimes I find it interesting that fans who are engaged but not engaged in the meta part of this, but engaged just and they watch the game and they're just saying, well, it's just all like, you want to talk about a group that gets you a Purdue fan after they lose in the tournament, not this year.
Yeah.
But the last 20.
Yeah.
When they lose in the tournament and they hear we need to go another direction.
Mm-hmm.
You do.
Yeah.
You sure about that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like what direction are you thinking of? Or
what direction?
Or is the direction accessible?
You have one direction, honestly, at this point.
Yeah. It's a good path. Yeah.
It's for us, we'd be all for it. Go right ahead, fire the guy and bring in whoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Not Micah Shrewsbury. Whoever, anybody but Micah Shrewsbury, bring him
Kwanzo.
Yeah, bring in Kwanzo. He's doing he's a great coach.
Yeah.
Great with his kids.
Yeah. It was funny, like you were
knocking him. He actually had a couple good seasons.
Yeah, he has a good season. Yeah. Well, it's funny, like, just going back, you said something interesting that you said, God loves me. And that brought up a memory, going back to, let's say, like high school, college, early adulthood and being on my own, I would have these conversations with fans of different teams, maybe IU and others. And, my theory is always like, if you really want to sober people up to reality, just get into some kind of gambling arrangement with them. Because nothing will sober you up more than like seeing your wallet start to get much thinner than it was before you made a wager on let's say sports outcome. But even like beyond, let's say like, gambling. I mean, a lot of times I would make wagers with people who would be like, hey, a dinner at Colorado Steakhouse or something like that.
Right.
So this is a quiz for you. What fan base, and it doesn't have to be basketball, what fan base do you believe I had probably the most success against in terms of, let's say, taking advantage of, but let's say having opportunities to put this question of bias into play in terms of wagering against certain teams?
I'd almost bet Purdue, but that's probably my bias speaking.
Close, but no. It is an in-state institution. It's not a basketball school.
Would it be Notre Dame?
It would be Notre Dame.
Yeah, because Notre Dame makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because God's on your side. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
There's an not only is there a sports angle to it, there's actual ecumenical angle to it. And so, I would just like the constant conversations I have with Notre Dame fans. And I mean, some of my Notre Dame friends like back home in like Terre Haute, some of the best people I know. Luckily, I didn't get them necessarily involved in like the gambling. It's like some other people. But I would constantly just like Notre Dame is going to like destroy Alabama in the game, in the championship game. It's like, no, they're not. Derrick Henry is going to run over them. They're going to Alabama's going to win probably by at least 3 touchdowns. You're crazy. And then there would be some kind of wager. And I ate quite well off of that one game. And not just once.
Multiple times.
Well, I will say this now, just like thinking about it now is like, I thought all those times I've had that with like some Notre Dame fans, I kind of realized that, if God is Catholic, I might be in some trouble.
Yeah. I get you.
I'll have some accounting to do once, I get up there.
I will say this before we lead out. So I was watching a game, and I don't know. I was watching a high school game, and I'm sitting next to a guy I coach with, and Jim and I, I said something of, don't mention this could actually happen. Like North winning a sectional, Columbus North winning the sectional. Yeah. And he kind of looked at me, and again, it's just one of those things that, I don't want to talk about it. Don't jinx it. And he goes, my wife looked at me once, Bob, and said, of all the variables that could happen to other people on the planet, if you had that much power, why would you waste it on this to jinx something?
Yeah. It's like that. We're in The Simpsons, like they get the monkey's paw and Homer wastes his wish on a sandwich.
Right. Exactly. You got it. It's like, it's like I've been saying a lot with like recruiting. Like if I knew what was going on in a 17-year-old kid's head, like if I could predict within 95% where a kid's going to go to college, do you think I'd waste that power on whether or not on my fandom for IU? Hell no. I'm selling video game platforms and music. Yeah, I'm flying private the rest of my life. It's but when Jim said it, I'm like, shit, your wife's right. Your wife's right. Your wife is right on the money. It's like, boom, there it is. It's like, okay, yep, she got it. Yeah. And on that note, when we come back, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the bias, but also how collective and individual biases toward inside fan bases. We're going to kind of delve into, do they really impact how the program operates? And if so, how is it a negative? How is it a positive? Or is it even just, or other cases where sometimes actually they can actually change the fan base? The program actually changes the fan base. It's an interesting, so when we come back on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Motes. Yeah, so Bob, so we kind of talked about the fan angle, and obviously, how the bias within fans can sort of distort how fans perceive sports and predict what's going to happen in sports. So now I guess we want to get into how does this actually like bleed over into the teams themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, when you and I were discussing this kind of prior to the show, I think we're thinking about this of like, okay, well, are there examples of what this impacts teams? And it seems to me almost like an open question, like,
yes.
Does it impact teams? Like, and in what cases does it, and what cases does it not? Because there's so many things that go on within a program that's sort of driving the strategy, let's say, that an athletic director and a coach has for their program. So I guess that's sort of like maybe just the lead-in question, like how does this work when it comes to what the program does in response to their fan base having very specific ways in which they like to see the game played?
Well, Galen, I think, kind of there's one end of this, which is showing how a program can actually evolve its fan base to a certain mode of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about IU from McCracken and Walton. Well, Watson and McCracken to Watson, and how IU played before Bob Knight, and then moving in, and then the move when Bob Knight came in, and IU actually moved into Assembly Hall,
mm-hmm.
and went from hurrying Hoosiers, fast shots, pushing tempo, not really a defensive powerhouse or juggernaut by any stretch of the imagination, to Bob Knight's way of doing things, which was, and wasn't always like 4 passes. They didn't always take 4 or 5 passes for every shot.
Yeah.
They didn't always not pressure. They didn't always play at a slow tempo. They were variable, but it was a different fundamentals were focused differently.
Yeah.
Strategically, the way the game was played was focused differently when Bob Knight came to town, and him spending the first couple of years training the fan base to react the way that they wanted to.
Yeah.
Great story about this guy named Jerry Foster. Used to own the White Star Meat Market in Columbus. And he used to have a policy at the White Star that when IU basketball won, the price of ground chuck would be the number would be the number of points your opponent scored. So let's say the opponent scored 79 points and IU won 86 to 79. Ground chuck the next day would be 79 cents.
Wow.
Yeah, Jerry almost lost his shirt multiple times when Bob Knight came to town, because at that point you had every housewife in Columbus who tuned into Channel 4 lined up in front of the White Star Meat Market.
Yeah,
the day we're at limit 5 pounds because they were going to stock their freezer at 47 cents a pound ground chuck. They're going to feed the family for the winter. It's like the husband. It's like they bought a cow, or their husband stole a cow and butchered it in the. It was that cheap for them.
How long did he do that? I'm curious.
He did it until I think he did it till they sold the market the day he died. He passed away unexpectedly, I believe, in the 80s. And hey, Columbus folks, I didn't know Jerry knew his wife Jan, wonderful sweet lady, huge. They were huge IU fans, huge, very, very well connected, very, very dialed into the Alumni Association. I'll put it this way.
Yeah.
The Bartholomew County Club in particular. So, but that sort of change in culture was through the coach and where that was. And then you kind of go on the other side of that, which is, okay, did we, when you think about how the game is supposed to be played, trying to think, like, going into we always pick on Kentucky. I'm trying to find a better example. Iowa's a good example, I think, because I think there are some similarities in pressure concepts and offensive system. Like that, Fran McCaffrey and Tom Davis couldn't be two more polar opposites in personality.
True.
But how Iowa plays under both, under Dr. Tom and Fran, are fairly similar.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they may not, they're so it's less of the personal style of the coach and more about how they play.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you compare it to what Todd Licklider and Steve Alford both tried to do at Iowa, and how that just didn't mesh.
Yeah.
Whether it was culturally, in the case of Alford, or in the case of style of play, which was, we're going to bring the Butler way to Iowa City.
Yeah.
It just didn't resonate because the style was so different, was fundamentally different under those coaches than it was when you look at the other brackets. So you look at those 2 brackets now, why Fran and Tom Davis lasted as long as they did in those jobs.
Yeah.
And they had a reasonable level of success, even though you could argue Alford had success at Iowa as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Like you think about, I always think about the transition, like, and you're right. Like I think with going from like Licklider to McCaffrey, obviously that was a change. I've always heard this, it could be apocryphal, but I've always heard this anecdote about Knight, one of his first practices or something, where they're practicing and there's someone like in the crowd or someone's at practice or something. Knight's like focusing like, okay, lockdown defense.
Right.
Take your time on, getting the shot, get the right shot. Don't hurry up. Someone says, how are we going to score 100? Because they're used to the way Branch used to do it.
Right.
And Knight said, yeah. And Knight said something effective like, we're not going to score 100, but they're not going to score more than 50. It was something to that effect. It was like, again, I don't even know if that actually took place, but it sounds like one of those too on the nose sort of like, this represents the change that took place. It sounds like one of those things you see in like the movies where someone like, reads the subtext out loud,
the quiet part
like that. Yeah.
So the part aloud.
Yeah, exactly. They read the theme aloud. But yeah, it's a little bit like that. Is that you're right? I've always thought of it as sort of like a bargain that fans make. Is that fans kind of get used to like, let's say, one style of play or certain types of players that they like, and they will stick with that. If a new coach comes in, and they want to do something different, the bargain in a way is we will let you do that if you win.
Right.
A lot.
Right.
But if you don't, we're going to be twice as mad because you took us away from the thing, our comfort zone. We like this style of play. And for the 4 years you were here, you went the opposite direction. And not only did we not like the style of play that you did, you also lost while you did it.
Well, so great example for IU fans is Archie Miller, which all the indicators when we made that hire, and I think you and I think we were on the front lines. We were the twins. I'll take the George Reeves, you take the other guy, where we're going, yippee, Georgia seceded.
Yeah.
Running out the door to go enlist. But the one thing we didn't fully grasp, and then I go back to the game I saw when Elliott Wilmer was playing for St. Louis University. I went to Dayton to watch him play. And I'm sitting in the stands and watching Archie Miller's offense going, what the hell is he trying to do? Yeah. I knew, but it's like, this just seems really kind of clunky.
Yeah.
And not realizing one reason why Tom Crean was successful in multiple ways at IU was his offense.
Yeah.
His defense wasn't always there, but offensively they were there.
It was good. He had good defense. We had good defenders. We had Oladipo that could like disrupt everything, like Ronnie Lott, just taking care of pressuring the ball everywhere.
But I don't think we fully respected the fact that there's still in our DNA this, and we call it we need shooters, which is, again, we start talking about what type of player does your school want? What makes it what makes it Indiana basketball, and what does the kid's an Indiana player? And who did we talk about at the start of the show? Sicily and Mullins. There's multiple kids. There's multiple kids that we're looking at. The one and I'm literally blanking the kid, the tall kid who just
Reeb.
Yeah, Reeb. Well, Reeb's but Reeb's a shooter too. Or I'm thinking of the Bryson Tiller.
Yeah.
He's really good.
Yeah.
But the point is, we're talking about we need, but they can really put the ball in the hoop, regardless of the whole conversation at this point. That's the sort of player we need.
Yeah.
Because that goes all the way back to Slick Leonard and Bobby and Jimmy Rail.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always had a theory about like our biases. So sometimes like they are based upon things we like, obviously, just like innately, I've talked about this on the pod before when I speak with fans that will like push back on something, on some data point that I present.
Right.
And I'll say, well, we should be doing X and we shouldn't be doing Y. I say, and I will ask them, is thing X something that you believe sincerely will produce a good result? Or is thing X something that you just personally like and prefer in basketball, where it's like more shooters or a different style, whatever it is? Because oftentimes I think that's where the confusion comes in, is that people think that like, well, I like this, surely this must work. Or maybe they even like it, maybe they don't even make that kind of calculation. It's just, I don't care. I just want to see this. Like whether it works, I think it does. I don't know, but I know I want to see this when my team plays. Mm-hmm. And also I think like that it's also in the reverse. I've always said that I think like sometimes bias, and again, like at scale, like even throughout a full fan base, bias, like our biases are also based upon like the things that annoy us. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily like with shooters. Yeah, I think there are a lot of people that like shooters for the sake of watching the ball go through the net from 21 feet out. I think just as many people are just annoyed when they see a 21-foot shot missed repeatedly over, the course of time. And so it's almost like just negating the negative, right? It's like, I want to see shooters because I am just so annoyed and pissed off when I see my team constantly missing.
Or a 15-foot shot that's free. Back on all things considered.
That's where I'm going with this, because it's almost like it's the obvious understatement of us losing our minds when we're 330. When I just did it, when Indiana, when your team, Indiana, whoever is 330th, but we're from Indiana. Does everybody have a basketball goal here? Yeah. I mean, that's that sort of thing of like, didn't you shoot 100 a day like Steve Alford and Larry Bird?
Yeah,
that was in their books. You should read it. And that's a sort of that divergence of a fan base bias and program operations. And I think it impacted Archie Miller in a way that at his tenure in a way.
Yeah.
That whatever high, I wouldn't even call it hype, but that high expectation he had coming in. Mm. And then you throw in, and I think you and I were talking about this before we went on. Coach comes in on a press conference, and whether it's Calipari on a teleprompter or it's Tom Crean or Archie Miller or whomever standing in front of the podium with the IU logo behind him, and you've got whether it's Fred Glass or Scott Dolson or whoever the AD down in UK was at the time, or where, and they start talking from the get-go about winning national championships or conference championships. Our standard here are titles.
Yeah.
And the fans say, you get it.
Yeah.
You understand that. Mm-hmm. Our bias is that we're a blue blood program and that we should be winning more than we're losing, and that we should be not only in the national conversation, but the top of the national conversation.
Yeah. That's
why we give money. That's why we give our time. That's why we post like idiots on whatever platform we're using. It's why it's why someone in a taxi cab follows recruits around Bloomington, because we believe that's where we should be.
Yeah, that's right.
And what'd you say? You said do the LexisNexis search on a coach and see how long did it take for them to go from title talk to
that's something I didn't mention it on our pod about on chip stacks, about my coaches that ascending and descending coaches. But that's like one note I had in there, but I don't think I got to it. But you're right. What typically happens is that when a coach comes in, makes the promises, like you said, Bob, the press conference, yes, we're going to win championships, conference championships, national championships, send guys to the pros, all that. Coaches that win and are still on that track will still be mentioning championships, and you'll still hear championships talked about like on the message boards and things like that. The interesting thing happens is that if you're at a school that isn't on that track, let's say they're kind of like moving up and then they start to decline again. Once that decline happens internally, the talk of national championships dies. Why does it die? Well, because it's inconvenient. It's like if you set the standard up here and all of a sudden you're down here, you're incentivized to not discuss that ever again. It's like championships. What are you talking about?
Playoffs? They're talking about playoffs? You're talking about going and Jim, you're going to be unemployed at the end of the season. You have Peyton Manning behind you as a quarterback, right? Yeah, that's where I'm going with that.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, it's very true. It's that the motives of the players involved, and I don't mean players like literal players, but I mean like, the AD, the coach and all that. Right. Yeah. They're responded to this almost like politicians have to be. It's like, oh man, I know what my constituency is expecting of me. And I have to be very, very careful how I navigate talking about those things. And yeah, sometimes it means that I may have to ignore or pretend to forget things maybe that, we talked about previously, because it's just not convenient right now to talk about those things if we're not really there. So it's an interesting conversation about, just like where the players are in terms of how they interact with the fan base, through those intermediaries, where it's like the media or websites or interviews. The tone changes based upon what's going on the court.
And I was just thinking how a chicken in every pot goes to half price nuggets at Zaxby's. How you go from one to the other, and they both mean two totally different things, even though it seems like there's a logical progression.
Yeah.
And I think that's a danger for programs, as they evolve, as they progress, because then it goes back to, and we were talking, we're really talking about, what type of players are we going to get?
Yeah.
Well, we don't really, I think, okay. So Painter Painter said something very revealing in the Big Ten Media Day. And I think some IU fans looked at this differently. And it's like, no, understand kind of what he's saying, which is he's basically saying that we want kids coming in here with a work ethic.
Yeah.
That's the organ grinder. That's the organ in the room with the monkey that's grinding the organ. That's what everyone pays attention to. What they're missing is the 800-pound gorilla in the corner who's just sitting there taking a nap.
Yeah.
Which is NIL. Right. Which is Painter needs you to give to the monkey so you can feed the gorilla.
Right.
What's going to appeal to the Purdue donor base? It's not going to be, coming off of a national championship run, coming off of being the national runner-up, saying we have to radically depart from what we're doing and get kids in here who are top players at top dollars.
Yeah.
Isn't going to register. What's going to register is, hey, throw your coins this way so I can feed this idiot gorilla in the back so we can get the players that I can develop into a national. Now, this is the salmon swimming upstream on the rushing river. It is a Purdue Rube Goldberg project. Purdue athletics may actually be doing a Rube Goldberg project. I'm sure there's a professor there, a guy with a doctorate who's actually doing that, who's saying, hey, this is my research. And when I prove that this thing actually can be done we've added more steps, more complications. We've actually put barriers in our place, in our way. We've done it so we can avoid the big pratfalls. Yeah. That's the road not taken. The joke about the road not taken is that it's more of a farce. It's not a good thing. We're not talking about the road. It's saying, boy, you just made it a lot harder on yourself. But if it's already hard, you might as well control what's hard about it.
Yeah.
That's what I think where Painter is with this, is that I'm going to appeal to not just our fans, but to a way of thinking, and also send a message to kids saying, if you want to come and work, I got a program for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Painter, I think Painter's really good at staking out space that is accessible, but that he can dominate the space that's accessible, right?
Yeah.
Like his ability, let's say years ago, like he had Juwan Johnson, like,
right.
And then like every center after him was not Juwan Johnson.
Right.
But he kind of like realized like, oh crap, I don't think I can get another JJ again. I can get an AJ Hammonds. From AJ Hammonds, I can get a Haas. I can get, I can get like an Edie, and then I can get, the Berg and the other guys that is coming in, Jacobson. So yeah, it's interesting. I think Painter's like one of the best coaches I've ever seen that like is like on the development of his like program, comes to like a roadblock and doesn't like just bang his head against the roadblock. Mm-hmm. Oh, we need to do this. He just gonna say, okay, well, that road's cut off. This is the road that's accessible to us. Well, we're gonna dominate the road that is given to us.
And he's an internal hire. He came up in that system. He came up through that process.
Yeah,
the question is going to be
with things that an outsider can't.
When Matt finally says, you can go ahead and name the practice facility after me, which, you can't get the floor. It's Coach Katie's floor, and he would never accept it, even if they try to put his name on it.
Yeah.
I don't think. But I think that, it's going to be interesting because you see it kind of with football, and with football, they kind of made some changes too when they brought in Joe Tiller, moving away from Mike Allstott. Even though they were quarterback they were never but then again, they really wasn't spread the field. They were always kind of a pro style offense. But there's always been that sort of this sort of thing up there where when your mascot wears a hard hat, you're probably not looking at a guy that's a YouTube star coming here.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think of like, there is like a kind of unique quality, I think, to certain programs are so well identified with, let's say, certain themes and styles. I think Purdue is like one of the most, let's say, representative. Because I can't see I could not see Jim Rowinski, Steve Scheffler, Mike Allstott, Brian Cardinal at USC.
No.
It's like just imagine those. No. Imagine Steve Scheffler on a surfboard.
His footwork wasn't bad. I have to give him that much.
Yeah.
Well,
So going back, to take a little bit of sidebar here. You were talking about players, right? Mm-hmm. I think I would say in so many of the conversations I had around like recruiting is that like player style, player type bias is like really probably one of the biggest areas of struggle I have in having conversations with fans. And it doesn't matter. It's not IU related. I mean, I've had some interesting conversations with like Purdue fans around like, yes, having Zach Edey is amazing. He's a once in a generation talent.
Right.
But that has impacts on the rest of the team in terms of how you can recruit, the kind of style you can play, and the impacts that has on like the ceiling of what you can do against teams like UConn and others. But yeah, I think one of the most common ones I run into, and I'm sure you and I have talked about this before, and I know you've had these same kind of conversations, is I think it is much easier to do an objective scouting report on an out-of-state kid than an in-state kid.
Yeah.
Like, why just say like just breaking down their game? Mm-hmm. It is like it's so easy to do like Oladipo or Thomas Bryant or Sheehy or other players when they're not within the confines of the state of Indiana. And again, this goes back to the whole like barbershop conversation, all that. But yeah, it's the number of times I've kind of confronted that of saying, okay, I'll go through like the list of the players on the team. So I think this kid's going to be about a 7.8 box plus minus. This kid's a 5.5, or like give the ranges, let's say.
Right.
I will notice, like when I go through that exercise, the most common pushback I get is for in-state kids.
Right.
Like even with the same fans, like, oh, I agree with you on this kid
A,
from
but
Illinois.
B, because
I agree with this kid from Virginia. I agree with this kid from like Georgia. But don't you know he's been in the gym all summer. Don't you think he's probably going to have a real breakout? And whoever it is, this goes back, and again, this is for also like having conversation with like, Purdue, Illinois fans about their in-state kids.
Right. Well, there's also like but there's also that idea of now, of insider bias.
Right.
I know about this kid. What you don't know is this. I know something you don't know.
Yeah.
You know that
you don't know what his heart is. You can't put that on a spreadsheet.
You don't know his mom. You don't know his dad and how dedicated they are. You don't know.
Right.
Yeah, and all that's there. Mm-hmm. And it's a fair bias because sometimes there is that context in the story. But here's the inverse. And again, you play the game of flip it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about Billy in Tuscaloosa, Alabama?
Yeah.
What do you know about this kid who's playing for Overtime Elite? What do you know about his family?
Yeah.
Well, but this kid here, okay, flip it and just kind of think about it. What matters is what happens in between the lines when you're talking about a scouting report. Right. All the other stuff around it is stuff that you have to trust that the staffs are vetting in their recruitments. Yeah. Like if there's a kid who's high level and high performing on the court and their offers are coming back and they're not Power 5 offers, that tells you something.
Yeah.
It
means
tells
all
you
the coaches have looked and said, yeah, maybe not.
Pass, or let's see how he does somewhere else for a couple of years, and maybe if he doesn't go pro, portal, because he won't be there long. And I also have a theory that if you're in that top area, you're not just there on raw talent. You've had to hone your game in.
Right.
There's a lot of 6'8" kids out there that can dunk a basketball and shoot it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids who can do those things. If you're at that point where you're top 80, top 150, top 200, you've at least put enough time into the game, and you've at least shown enough of a work ethic that you can actually somewhat. And there's far more of those kids who are doing it, that have proven it, that are Division I type players than there are kids who are definitive misses because they just have a freakish amount of athletic uniqueness to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You think about it. It's like, it's almost like a narrative story, right?
It is.
People like stories. And I think I think what makes fans, especially like just think about the IU context, it has been a while since there's been, let's say, an IU kid that was a 3-star, that was high skilled, maybe not, greatest athlete, maybe, but like just really like high basketball IQ, all the stuff that kind of checks all the barbershop check boxes. There hasn't been a kid like that in a while that kind of came through and became like an NBA breakout, sort of like, guy that, but everyone's still kind of searching for that one, right?
Well, who was it?
Yeah, well,
who was that?
Yeah, because Alford was kind of like, a known commodity, Chaney, despite what people think, like he was a known commodity. I mean, there's,
you because you just said a 3-star, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking a 150
plus, yeah.
150 plus, maybe 170, maybe 200 to 100 would that be accurate on 3?
Maybe 3 stars are generally like 150 to 200 or so.
I'm kind of throwing that. I'm just trying to kind of get that idea here.
I can think of a name.
Go for it. I'm dying
but it's
here.
Not an IU person.
Go for it. I'm dying here.
I think the guy that would have fulfilled that sort of great emotional need would have been Gordon Hayward.
I think you're right. But
Hayward was
but I'm going to throw my favorite conjunction in there. But the one that we're biased against the word but.
Yeah.
He grew 5 inches between his senior year of high school and freshman year of college, right? Was it 5 inches? It was a ridiculous, freakish amount of growth in a human.
Yeah.
At the age of 18.
Yeah.
That you're right. Gordon Hayward would definitely fit that model.
Yeah. And I think like with a lot of fans, like when I talk to IU fans, that's kind of like the dream. And that's where the bias kind of comes in. It's like, God, we just want to have like these players that come through that maybe people kind of overlook them, and through grit and skill and shooting and defensive awareness and basketball IQ, they rise up, become an NBA eligible, lead IU to whatever banners and championships. That's kind of the model. And I think like when they get other kids that maybe just kind of fall short, but I still think that like that desire is still operating in the background. You don't know. I know you said that he's only going to be like, BPM of X, but I think he's going to be 2X BPM because of all these things. And I think it's still that like that desire is still burning behind the scenes in terms of their bias.
He will punch above his weight. I do think I think Braden Smith has that capability, by the way, just in the way he plays.
Yeah,
he's savvy.
There's
a pot. So now, as we go back and let's reframe the conversation and look at it again, does it make sense why Painter says what he says? Does it make sense why Painter goes the route that he's going? Because he may not get them all to the league. If he can just get him enough NIL, if he can just get enough buy-in from his base to be able to do what he needs to do.
Yeah.
But then you go to the road that's taken, and can IU compete on that road? And I think the answer is yes. I think the last thing that we can learn since even Bob Knight's left is that IU can still bring in the national championship level talent.
Yeah.
Just need to do, as we say, more of it.
Yeah.
So you're setting up a beautiful situation, even in the NIL transfer portal era, where you have two programs that are almost diametrically opposed, which is why I don't like to show the meme to too many people, but Matt Painter looking shot going, you mean, wait, a free root beer flow to the Triple X and play hard shorts written on your ass, and the worst barber in the Midwest. That's not enough for a kid anymore.
Yeah.
That's my way of saying to a Matt Painter, maybe we should go and throw that out there on those show notes. I'm okay with less, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
But that Matt Painter's looking at it going, no, that's the kid he's going for, is a kid that's going to be enticed by that sort of not even simplicity.
Yeah.
But it's also saying IU's going to go after a different kid than Matt Painter.
Yeah. Yep. Different markets,
and different, not even expectations, but biases.
Right.
I think so.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to segue into our own biases. So when we come back on X's and Joes, or anything else for segment 2, Bob?
No. We need to go forward.
I think
we got that one pretty well.
I think we squeezed the lemon pretty good on that one. Yeah. So we come back in segment 3. Bob and I will talk about our own biases and our own preferences next on X's and Joes.
So we're back, and I will say that it's recognized. This is a quote from Lawrence of Arabia, where Claude Rains' character looks at Peter O'Toole.
One of your favorite movies?
One of my favorite movies. Lawrence looks and says, "Oh, I think it'll be fun going to the desert." No one likes the desert.
Yeah,
but it is widely recognized that you have a funny sense of fun.
Yeah.
Why do we do what we do? And some of the biases that I think that we hold, and we shouldn't talk about ourselves in a plural sense, because I know that we do disagree. May not always sound like it in the show, but we actually have some moments where we're wired a little different.
Yeah.
Or a lot different.
I always say our lenses are different.
Our lenses are different, and we try to work to come to conclusions that we can both kind of just live with.
Yeah, exactly.
Knowing full well that we can't do. But I think that may be the clear bias, is that we always see this as a problem that we worked out. Would you agree with that? That we can always work that there's always, and even though, again, I'm the half full pessimist and you're the half empty optimist sort of thing.
Yeah.
We carry traits both of pessimist, optimist. We both see, but the way we look at it is that we do say, hey, there's a whole range of possibilities here. We're just trying to focus people in on what are the most likely ones.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say that I agree with that. I think I was compared like satellites. A satellite at any given time can only see like half of the world. It's like,
right.
But then there's a satellite that's also on the other end that sees the other side that you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I kind of compare that with us. It's like, you and I end up like triangulating stuff. It's like I come from things. I come from the game more from like the scouting, recruiting, metrics side, and you definitely are much more like coaching philosophy, and things like that. We now I'm interested in coaching stuff, and you obviously like have good background with like metrics, but obviously where we sort of align those in terms of our hierarchy of importance varies.
Now, it was our start point because, I mean, honestly, I'll tell you that if I'm not a good talent evaluator, I'm not good at metrics, and I shouldn't be coaching. Period.
Yeah.
You can't do the job at any level. By the way.
Yeah.
Well, gee, Timmy, just throw the ball up over the back of your head. That's a good shot. Or if you have a kid that has 22 in range and he's drilling it 9 out of 10 times. Well, you're only 8 years old and you give the ball to other kids so they can shoot it. If the kid's like throwing the ball into the stands.
Yeah.
I mean, or in the high school level, that sort of thing as well, which is, you're going to design things around what you have. And again, you're trying to develop a winning formula.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's more about like prioritization focus, I guess, let's say, in terms of like our first instincts, let's say. That's oftentimes how those things kind of
first
work.
instinct. That would be a good way to look at it. But
yeah,
I also think you and I over the years have also kind of dealt with the whole sort of the specific of bias, where it's kind of like source bias, where it's like the source bias for us can be kind of like if we see certain codes in a conversation, it may trigger something in my head that says, okay, we're not having a conversation about this. We're having a conversation about this. It's kind of, when we talk about bias, like the Bear Bryant story about bringing USC to Tuscaloosa and bringing the kid in that this is a football player. Like when we hear that code, we're pretty quick to jump on it. We may not call it out. But that may change how I respond to something. And I know that's the same way with you that, okay, we don't want to get in this conversation because then it gets real tribal real fast and not a place we want to go with this at all. And we want to kill it, especially in a public forum.
There's good Bill Burr episodes about that.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
No.
Yeah.
You're right. It's like, the conversations are like I always find, especially when you go to a bar, this kind of like, the whole in vino veritas kind of thing. It's like, you can kind of get weird conversations, like you said, like, people are going like, where's he going with this? And I'm about to walk away if it goes a certain direction. But yeah, I've always found that, again, like, kind of going back to what I said about like annoyance, like so much of our biases, I think whatever annoys us most is oftentimes where our biases get steered, and we're trying to avoid the annoyance, or we're trying to like maximize the joy or whatever. But I've just noticed, like, over the years, more and more, that the things that annoy me oftentimes become the thing I like think about, and I'm trying to avoid it. Right. I mean, I think maybe it might be different for me now because, I do stuff like this. And so now I'm actually like, okay, well, people send me messages. Mike, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Or it's like, oftentimes I'll like write something and something about like basketball recruiting and correlations to like Final Fours and all that. And people will pipe in, and then they will come to the conversation with their own bias. Oh, I know you said that, but what about this one example? And usually I'll find out that one example is the thing that they liked. It was their bias. This team played this system. Why can't someone do that again? And so I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's not entirely just about like disgust, but it's maybe the most underrated factor, I think, when it comes to how we perceive the game, is that we're just annoyed by different things. It's like in politics, like so much of like our political perceptions are based upon annoyance. I don't like that. I don't want to see that. This person says this thing isn't going to happen. So, and the one, I'll give you this one great example. And it's a story. I was on this work trip. It was out to the West Coast, not fully in the West Coast, but out West. I was working at a corporation. It was Thursday night. I was going to be flying back the next day. So it's kind of like almost a party environment because the next day at their work, they were basically kind of off. So it's like,
right.
Let's go out. It was Thursday night. We're going out. They were basketball fans. And they knew I was basketball. So we're talking. It's like, hey, we kind of get together on Thursdays. If the game's on, we'll go watch it. And so I'm driving. And so all these colleagues of mine like warned me. It's like, okay, we have our pal. He works at a rival company, but we're still friends. Just so you know, he's a little weird in watching basketball games. Just give you a heads up. And I was like, oh, okay. It's like, well, and they said, he's really bothered by turnovers.
Okay.
I said, okay, well, everyone's bothered by turnovers. What's
right?
The deal? So it's like, you don't understand. He's really, really, really bothered by turnovers. It's like, all right. So we get to the BW3s, meet the guy, he's like, he's really nice, and just totally normal before the game started. And then the game started. And it was almost perfect because the team, I won't even mention the team, but the team he was cheering for was having like one of the worst like strength turnovers they had ever had. It was like they had like 25 turnovers or something. And the funny thing is, before I got there, the other warning gave me is like, look, he'll start getting kind of upset, and he doesn't really yell, but you'll notice like his voice goes up. Goes up. It's like, yeah, it's just, he kind of gets like, the more upset he gets, the voice goes up. It's like, all right. I swear, Bob, there was a sequence where his team turned over the ball 4 times in a row.
Oh no.
And every time the turnover happened, he went up 1 octave. After the 4th turnover, he sounded like
a falsetto.
He sounded like a mix of like Carole King and Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse.
Oh my God! Stop turning the ball over.
So it's funny you mentioned that because I was just thinking about like I'm watching so to show restraint on the cell phone, for example, when I'm watching the game and I maybe and I try to stay off Twitter. Usually it's talking to you and some other people.
Yeah.
So I don't say something just obnoxiously dumb. And I even try to censor myself around you because, I respect you too much. But people I love also who are outside of this sort of sphere. Mm-hmm. And I'll be watching or they'll talk to me, whether it's in person or not here. And it's like, they'll say something and all of a sudden I find my annoyance level goes from base level simmer to hard boil in a fraction of a second because don't they know how much this pisses me off when someone brings this like argument into this?
Yeah.
They may not know it because they may not have expressed how much it just drives me up the wall. But if I'm sitting here watching it and somebody I care about just says something, I must want like, well, how could he not catch that ball? As a linebacker is laying them out when an All-American linebacker is laying them out and the ball hits him in the hands.
Yeah.
I'm going to take you out there. We're going to throw a ball to you. I'm going to drive my car into you. And if you hold on to it, then you can criticize. And I'm thinking that in my head. And sometimes it may even slip out a little closer to that. I'm like, oh, I need a sanctuary. I need a sanctuary. You understand? You don't understand the restraint. I feel like I'm showing at times.
Yeah. So they're
because my bias is basically it's like I'm because my bias is that I understand how hard this really is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really. But there's a point of there are circles in your life, and it's like on this part of it, I just don't want to be fighting a 2-front or 5-front war right now.
Do you think, as a coach, that influences your biases in terms of just observing the game?
Oh yeah. Oh, it does. One of my biggest biases is that I have a belief that anybody can learn to do something.
Right.
I have to believe that. I have to believe I can develop a kid.
It's an occupational necessity to think that, yeah, kid, you can do something. Yeah.
Son, you're never going to do this. Is the thing how the hell do I know? Do I look? Because again, if I could figure out what you're doing, I'm not going to do it on this game. I'm going to find out if I could predict everything you're going to do. I'm going to bet on you in different ways.
Yeah.
Not on this game.
Yeah.
You know, it's a thing of you can get better enough. You can take something that's below average and maybe get it to median. You may not have an elite ceiling, but you can have a functional ceiling at levels of the game.
Yeah.
I believe that. So when I look even at a college thing, like, okay, so like a prime example is Troy Galloway shooting, and everybody loses their mind on it. It's like there's a world where he's a 40% 3-point shooter. There's a world where he's a 25% 3-point shooter, and there's a whole bunch of worlds in between the two.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you get him in the place where you get the most out of that kid?
Yeah.
And that to me is a challenge of coaching, is that how do you not only just develop skill, develop players, but develop your culture, I don't want to use the word systems. We're going to talk about that next time.
Yeah.
But how you develop your principles of play and your concepts to maximize a player's gifts.
Yeah. Would you say that's like the biggest, like, I would say that's a very good description of your approach.
Yeah.
I would say that maybe that's almost like a perfect opposite of maybe a lot of my biases.
Right.
Because I think so much of the data I work on, it's like, and the stuff that I see is almost a lot of it is based upon limits.
Mm-hmm.
Like here and no further, right? Like, because you think about, like, if I spend so much time focusing on teams that win national championships and Final Fours, which is like in the basis of what I do, I think I just more, I'm more aware of just like, okay, this is what teams that win look like, and then there's the opposite of what they do, and so much of it is just coming to the realization, like, okay, yeah, that once you're below like this level on certain things, the probability of you, like, winning the way the teams up here do is going to be very limited.
Right.
And again, it's not a guarantee. It's just like, the probabilities involved and, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think if I did not do a lot of the metrics work that I do and all the historical data and all that, I think I would have a completely different view of the game. It would be much funner. I'll tell you that. It'll be much more optimistic and fun if I did.
Well, because it goes back to the genesis of what we've talked about for almost 30 years. But there's that convergence that we talk about so many times of the aggregate versus the specific.
Yeah.
Like where I think the biggest bias, the biggest bias people see towards your research is that they see this applicable on a micro level.
Right.
I've learned, and you can push back on me if you want to. I know we're at this point, people may be very interested at this point, or may have already like fallen asleep. But I would say that your process is best in the aggregate.
Oh yeah, well, it's
almost exclusively in the aggregate.
Yeah,
because
in the aggregate and over time. That's the thing.
Right. I would say aggregate would be that would be time as well as volume.
Yeah.
That if you start looking at this we got one player in the top 80 and we got 3 that aren't.
Yeah.
So we're doing what Mike says to do. No, you're not. That's not the point. We did this one time.
Yeah.
No, that isn't it. Like you can say what Micah Shrewsbury's doing right now is exactly what you say a program, what your research has showed a program can do.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that one's Jalen Harrelson or isn't.
Yeah.
What matters is the players he's bringing in right now are the players that are that fit the model.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and over the time, aside from like when I get together with you, I go out of my way to like not talk about that stuff. When, like I said, you said at the beginning, when you're at the game, you're just there to cheer, or you're just there to take it in, unless you're with, with us where we talk about this stuff. But yeah, I made a decision very early on. It's just against my nature as well. I don't want to be that guy that you see so often in different like venues. I don't, the person that you're at a party and they're the beer expert and you just want to drink the beer and enjoy it. And this annoying know-it-all wants to prove that he's a know-it-all. well, the hops from, this part of Bavaria are different than ones in that part. And you're just like, I'm just trying to drink here. And I've always kind of taken that approach, like, with like the basketball discussion. If someone asks me a question at a game, hey, Mike, where did this player, come in terms of the rankings? What was he, who gave him offers? I'll answer that. But I'm at the game or just in that kind of environment, I am so far away from the metrics. But once the game's over and you're kind of away from all that, and you're in this, and people are saying, okay, what do we do to win championships? Okay, right. That's when the stockholder part has to kick in, and the cheerleader part has to kind of, take a
die down. Yeah, right. So here we are.
This is a good conversation, I thought.
Oh, I think so as well. I mean, and hopefully, you get. I think some of the as we go through this season, you're going to be kind of we're trying. And hopefully, we applied a lot of this to what you're seeing currently in the program that you may love. Which, if it's like us, it's Indiana. And most of you are Indiana fans, I would gather. Or if you're not, kind of seeing this as you're going through this, this season. But we're going to talk, again, how we frame this in a larger issue is kind of what we do here. And so we want to thank Bob Thompson for the music and the sound of the show, as well as John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing the look and logo of the show.
Yep. And looking forward, let's see, episode 19, modern basketball, how offensive defensive systems are different and evolving. That's one I think you've been looking to do, Bob. Is that right?
Yeah, it's
this episode was kind of a my episode, and this is going to be like,
I mean, I don't know how the hell we're going to do it. I think a lot of this, because these are going to be kind of some running themes throughout the years also, which is kind of looking at kind of this sort of, how these different factors play in. But
yeah,
as we got out of last season, moving into this season, as I've been looking at not just my team, but other teams, and also just across the board, where the game is progressing and moving away from the idea. And this is true, I think, of multiple sports where it's becoming more of a tactical versus philosophical conversation. That principles of play versus we're running this type of defensive or offensive system, and the ability, how much are you able to kind of do and adjust? And I think a lot of people are beginning to notice, like we see this on message boards. Well, a lot of these teams look like everybody. There doesn't seem to be too much difference in how these teams are playing.
Yeah, right.
Well, there's a reason for that. And it's actually happening. Mm-hmm. You're not, do not adjust your dial. Do not adjust your TV. You're not living in the twilight zone. This is, or the outer limits here. We're seeing, this has been kind of a revolution in the game over the last, I would say, few years, definitely the last decade or so, where things are progressing. And so the question is, how does that look like? And so the question is, how are these systems different and evolving? Yeah. They still exist, but the variance between them isn't what it once was.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that'll be a good conversation, and one I think it's you do see that so much, especially when the tournament comes around. And so it's I think it's an overdue conversation. Yeah. So look for that to drop about 2 weeks from now. So it'll be sometime like maybe later October. So keep an eye out for that. So until then, this Endless Conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Reddit Meridian, The Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and BackHomeNetwork.com. Until next time, I'm Mike Nemeth.
And I'm Bob Modes.
Have a good one, everyone.